What if one quiet policy update could suddenly put your retirement income at risk without a phone call, without a warning, and without you doing anything wrong? That is exactly what happened to Margaret Collins, a 69-year-old retired school cafeteria worker from Dayton, Ohio. Margaret spent more than 30 years waking up before sunrise, standing on tired feet, and serving meals to thousands of children every single day. Through every paycheck, Social Security taxes were automatically deducted. She followed the rules her entire life and believed the system she paid into would be there when she needed it most. Margaret was not wealthy. She lived in a small apartment, drove an old sedan, and depended heavily on her monthly Social Security and SSA payments to survive. Her savings account contained a little under $11,000, money she had carefully saved over many years for emergencies, prescriptions, and rising grocery costs. She considered it her safety net. Nothing luxurious, nothing excessive, just enough to feel secure in retirement. Then one cold morning in February, everything changed. Margaret opened her mailbox and found an official letter from the Social Security Administration. The notice informed her that her SSI benefits had been suspended due to a financial eligibility review. There was no phone call, no warning, no explanation in simple language. According to the government's system, a recent insurance payout connected to a minor car accident had temporarily pushed her bank account above the allowed asset limit. Even though the money was already being used for repairs and medical bills, the automated review system flagged her account instantly. Her monthly benefits stopped without notice. Worse, the letter claimed she now owed thousands of dollars in overpayments that the government expected to recover. Margaret sat at her kitchen table for hours, staring at the pages, trying to understand complicated bureaucratic language that felt impossible to decode. She kept asking herself one question over and over again. How can they stop benefits I worked my entire life for without even speaking to me first? Dari kaptakan die. And here is the disturbing reality. Margaret's story is no longer unusual. Across America, quiet policy changes, automated financial monitoring systems, and AI-driven eligibility reviews are transforming how retirement and disability benefits are tracked. Millions of Americans have absolutely no idea these systems even exist. But behind the scenes, the government now has more tools than ever to monitor income, savings, bank activity, and financial changes in real time. And for many retirees, one small mistake, one temporary deposit, or one unnoticed rule change could suddenly place their entire financial security at risk. The frightening part is that most retirees still believe these systems only affect people committing fraud. That is simply not true anymore. In reality, many of the individuals being flagged today are ordinary Americans who followed the rules their entire lives. The system is no longer waiting for intentional wrongdoing. Instead, it is increasingly relying on automated verification systems designed to identify anything that appears unusual, even temporarily. And once the system flags your file, reversing the damage can become incredibly difficult. What many people do not realize is that the Social Security Administration has quietly expanded the way it gathers financial information over the past several years. These changes rarely make national headlines because they are buried inside administrative updates, internal agency memorandums, and technical policy revisions that the average person never sees. But the consequences are very real. In 2025 and 2026, several new verification procedures dramatically increased how often financial reviews can occur for SSI recipients and disability beneficiaries. Under older systems, reviews often happen periodically, maybe once every year or two, sometimes even less frequently. But modern digital reporting systems now allow agencies to cross-reference information much faster than before. Bank balances, wage records, pension payments, tax documents, freelance income, and even certain government databases can now communicate with each other automatically. That means changes that once took months to detect can now trigger alerts almost immediately. And this is where many retirees unknowingly place themselves in danger. Imagine receiving a tax refund, inheritance payment, insurance settlement, or even financial help from a family member. You may believe that temporary money sitting in your account for a few days is harmless. But for SSI recipients operating under strict asset limitations, even temporary increases can potentially create problems if they are not handled properly. In some cases, the government may classify those temporary funds as countable resources during a verification period. Once that happens, overpayment notices can follow quickly. The reason this issue is becoming so alarming is because the average retiree still thinks of Social Security as a stable earned benefit system that functions mostly on autopilot. People assume once they qualify, the checks simply continue unless something major changes. But the reality is far more complicated now. The federal government is steadily moving toward a far more data-driven oversight model where eligibility is constantly evaluated through digital monitoring systems. And the technology behind these systems is becoming increasingly sophisticated. Today, financial verification programs already allow agencies to electronically communicate with participating banks and financial institutions. Payroll reporting databases can automatically track wage updates. IRS information sharing programs can cross-reference interest income, dividends, pensions, and retirement distributions. Employment databases can identify new jobs or quarterly wage changes. Multiple agencies now contribute data into overlapping verification networks that create increasingly detailed financial profiles on benefit recipients. What makes this different from the past is speed. Decades ago, many of these systems operated slowly, often relying on manual paperwork and delayed reporting. Today, automation changes everything. Artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms are being integrated into government systems specifically to identify discrepancies faster than human reviewers ever could. The government no longer needs someone to manually examine every account. The software does much of the scanning automatically. And once automation enters the equation, small errors can become massive problems very quickly. One incorrect classification, one delayed report, one temporary deposit, one outdated valuation. That is sometimes all it takes for a review process to begin. The individual affected often learns about the issue only after receiving a notice in the mail, informing them their benefits have already been reduced, suspended, or marked for overpayment recovery. For elderly Americans already struggling with inflation, rising medication costs, rent increases, and food prices, these disruptions can become financially devastating almost overnight. Now, here is something else that deserves very close attention. Social Security itself was never originally designed to operate like a welfare-style monitoring program. When President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law during the 1930s, the core philosophy behind the system was extremely important. Workers would contribute payroll taxes throughout their careers and later receive earned retirement benefits. The program was intentionally structured around contribution history rather than aggressive financial surveillance. The reason for that philosophy was simple. Lawmakers understood that once benefits become heavily tied to personal wealth evaluations, constant eligibility testing eventually follows. And once constant testing begins, the political debate surrounding benefits changes entirely. Instead of focusing on earned contributions, discussions shift toward determining who deserves assistance and who does not. That shift matters more than most people realize. Over the years, more politicians and policy organizations began proposing various forms of means testing for retirement programs. At first, the proposals targeted only the ultra-wealthy, millionaires, billionaires, individuals considered far outside the middle class. Supporters argued that reducing benefits for wealthy retirees could help preserve government funding and reduce deficits. But history repeatedly shows something important about these proposals. The thresholds almost always begin moving downward over time. A policy originally aimed at only the extremely wealthy slowly expands toward upper middle class households, then eventually toward ordinary retirees with moderate savings, retirement accounts, or property ownership. The definition of wealthy quietly changes depending on fiscal pressures and political priorities. That is why many retirement experts have started warning Americans to pay close attention to the language being used in modern policy debates. Because the real issue is not simply whether billionaires should receive benefits. The real issue is whether governments are steadily building systems capable of monitoring and evaluating everyone's finances at increasingly detailed levels. And many signs suggest that infrastructure is already being built. Today, government agencies already possess enormous quantities of financial information. Banking data, tax returns, payroll records, employment history, pension distributions, investment income, savings bond redemptions, state wage reports, public assistance records, disability claims, healthcare databases. The pieces already exist. Modern automation simply allows those pieces to communicate more efficiently than ever before. Most Americans still underestimate how rapidly this transformation is occurring. Artificial intelligence is accelerating government processing capabilities at a pace that would have seemed impossible only 10 years ago. Systems can now identify patterns, anomalies, and reporting inconsistencies across millions of records almost instantly. What once required teams of auditors can now be partially automated through machine learning software trained to recognize financial discrepancies. And while supporters argue this improves efficiency and reduces fraud, critics warn it also increases the risk of innocent people being caught inside automated systems that lack human flexibility and common sense. Because computers do not understand context. An algorithm may see an account balance exceed a threshold without understanding the money was immediately spent on emergency surgery. A system may detect temporary freelance income without recognizing that the work only lasted 1 week. Software may identify an inheritance deposit without accounting for outstanding debts that consume the funds almost immediately afterward. Human lives are complicated. Automated systems are not, and that disconnect is becoming one of the biggest fears among retirement advocates today. Many elderly Americans already struggle to navigate complicated government paperwork. Long hold times, confusing forms, technical language, and constantly changing rules create enormous stress for people simply trying to survive on fixed incomes. When automation removes even more direct human interaction from the process, many fear vulnerable retirees will increasingly find themselves fighting systems they barely understand. That is exactly why stories like Margaret's matter, because they reveal something deeper happening beneath the surface of these policy changes. This is no longer just about one suspended payment or one overpayment notice. It is about a system gradually shifting toward continuous digital oversight, while most Americans remain completely unaware of how dramatically the rules are evolving around them. And for millions of retirees living paycheck to paycheck, the stakes could not be higher. And this is where the situation becomes truly dangerous for millions of Americans approaching retirement age today. Most people still believe the biggest threat to their financial future is inflation, healthcare costs, or the possibility of Social Security running out of money someday. But increasingly, the real threat may be complexity itself, a system so automated, so interconnected, and so difficult to understand that ordinary people no longer know how to protect themselves inside it. Because once a problem enters the system, fixing it is rarely simple. Many retirees who receive overpayment notices describe the same experience. Endless paperwork, hours spent on hold with government offices, letters written in language that feels impossible to understand, appointments scheduled months away. And during all of this, the bills continue arriving. Rent still has to be paid. Prescriptions still need refilling. Food prices continue rising. Yet the benefits people depended on for survival may suddenly disappear while their cases move through bureaucratic review processes. And perhaps the most frightening part is that many people do not even realize they were at risk until after the damage is already done. That is why awareness matters now more than ever before. If you or someone you love receives SSI, SSDI, or other income-based benefits, understanding the rules is no longer optional. It has become essential financial survival knowledge. People must know their asset limits. They must understand reporting requirements. They must document major financial changes immediately and keep copies of everything. Because in an automated system, missing paperwork or delayed reporting can create consequences that spiral quickly. Experts who specialize in Social Security law often warn retirees about one critical mistake: assuming the government automatically understands your situation. It does not. The system sees numbers first. Context usually comes later, sometimes much later. That means the burden often falls on the individual to prove why a transaction occurred, why funds temporarily appeared in an account, or why certain assets should not count toward eligibility calculations. And unfortunately, many elderly Americans are completely unprepared for that reality. Now, none of this means Social Security itself is disappearing tomorrow. It does not mean every retiree will suddenly lose benefits. And it certainly does not mean panic is the answer. But ignoring these changes would also be a serious mistake. Because whether people realize it or not, the structure surrounding government benefits is evolving rapidly right now. The combination of artificial intelligence, automated financial monitoring, digital reporting systems, and expanding verification tools is fundamentally changing how retirement oversight works in America. Quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. Most major transformations never happen all at once. They happen step by step, policy by policy, update by update, until one day people wake up and realize the system no longer operates the way they thought it did. That is exactly why stories like Margaret's should serve as warnings, not exceptions. Because Margaret did everything society told her to do. She worked hard, paid taxes, saved carefully, lived modestly, followed the rules. Yet one temporary financial event triggered a chain reaction she never saw coming. And for many retirees living on the financial edge, even a short interruption in benefits can become catastrophic. So here is the most important takeaway from everything we discussed today. Do not assume someone else is watching out for your financial security. Learn how these systems work yourself. Review your records. Monitor your accounts carefully. Keep documentation organized. Report changes immediately. And most importantly, stay informed, because the rules surrounding retirement and government benefits are changing faster than most Americans realize. The people who protect themselves best in the years ahead will not necessarily be the wealthiest people. They will be the people who understand the system before the system suddenly affects them. And that brings me to my question for you today. Do you believe the government is becoming too involved in monitoring the financial lives of retirees and benefit recipients, or do you think these systems are necessary to prevent fraud and protect taxpayer money? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I read every single one, and your feedback shapes future discussions on this channel. If you found this video valuable, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this information with someone who may need to hear it before it is too late. And remember, staying informed is no longer optional. For millions of retirees, it may become the difference between financial stability and financial crisis. I will see you in the next video.